eat vegetarian food. Do not kill animals in order to get your food.
Claire, how did you find Carnivore?
Thank you for having me on, Dave, and giving me an opportunity to answer that question. And also a really big thank you to all the guests you've had over the last year or so that I've watched, because I've just learned so much from them on my own carnivore journey. And, I'm hoping that telling my story today will, be a little bit of give back and will help other people maybe just found carnivore, maybe wondering about starting this crazy way of eating, and helping them on their journey too. So I will go back and start, I think, with a few things from childhood. I'm in my 60s now, and that makes me a child of the 60s. And when I look back, I just can't believe the amount of sugar that I had in my diet. And sugar was something that was just everywhere. The school dinners, we had school dinners, and there was always a pudding. You'd go around anybody's house and it would be squash and biscuits. Cheap biscuits full of sugar, custard creams, Garibaldis, Bourbons. Everybody had their favorites. Fig rolls, they really stuck to your teeth. That was great. And of course, if you had a drink as a child, it was usually squash. I just can't remember ever being offered water. So your teeth were constantly bathed in sugar. And then there was the sweetie jar. So having sweets was a way of, it was a way of teaching kids to budget their pocket money, rewarding them if they did some chores, withholding sweets if did something wrong, I guess. Trading in the playground, and anybody my age will remember there was an amazing, going to the sweet shop was like going into Aladdin's cave. It was flying saucers, which were these disgusting coloured sort of wafers filled with sherbet fountains with licorice in the top. I don't know if you had these in Australia.
I remember the flying saucers when I was growing up in Scotland.
Oh, Scotland. Okay. Anyway, the upshot of this was I ended up with very bad teeth. Or probably it's fairer to say, rather than blame the teeth, very decayed teeth. And this, I'd actually forgotten about it until recent talk about the state of dentistry in the UK, and how people can't find a dentist anymore, and how kids are getting terrible tooth decay because of their diet, and ending up in hospital. And I can remember that didn't happen to me, but the dentist had to, I just had stumps at one point, and the dentist had to paint my teeth with some kind of dark brown liquid that stuck to them to protect them. I'd kind of edited it out, and it didn't cause me any trauma. One of the things about being a kid is that to a large extent, whatever happens seems normal. But I know my parents were quite anxious about how my second teeth would come through. Forward a little bit to leaving home, coming to Bristol, where I live still, to uni, and there I was cut loose for the first time. I was living in a fairly poor neighborhood, and everything was basically baked goods, pasties, cheap pizzas from the supermarket, college canteen was beans and chips, beans and jacket potato, beans and spaghetti. That continued, and it was the only time in my life that I've ever really put on weight, and experienced a weight problem. It didn't matter if I just ate fewer beans and chips, I still seemed to put on that extra sort of stone that I didn't want. But anyway, that was resolved. I mean, it just goes to show how carbs, make you, make you put on weight, really. That was easily resolved, though, because I moved from that neighborhood into a more sort of cosmopolitan neighborhood, and all of a sudden the world opened up to, let's see, Indian grocers, Italian delicatessen, West Indian stores, and there was a very good organic supermarket, or small supermarket near where I lived. And at that time, for the first time, I had a nice kitchen. I moved into a nicer rented place, and I could really cook and prepare food, which I enjoyed. So I explored all sorts of cooking, by myself on a daily basis with friends. But I guess the predominant influence became the whole food shop, because the organic message, the healthiness of veg, the plant-based agenda was beginning to happen. This would have been the early 80s. Okay, so this was coming into predominance, and that it was healthy, and I knew that I could tell from the way my body had changed that the chips and beans days weren't the best. So I did lose that extra weight very easily, and had a lot of fresh veg, was cooking a lot of Indian curries and things like this. It also introduced me to the world of soy, and I guess, unfortunately, I really quite liked the taste. So I switched to soy milk, soy custard with my flapjacks, which was my go-to quick and easy pudding, soy burgers. You could buy tofu fresh.
And this was in the 80s?
This was the early 80s.
Wow.
Yeah, so this was quite happening. And things pretty much stayed that way. The next significant change in the way I ate was the end of the 90s, because I started to eat much more Indian food. I'd already started, but I went sort of wholly vegetarian, and that was mainly to do with the fact that I'd started practicing yoga, and many of my friends were yoga practitioners, and then I trained to be a yoga teacher, and you'd go on retreats, and you learned more and more, not only about Indian culture, or at least Southern Indian culture, which is very vegetarian based, but also the teachings of yoga, the philosophical teachings. And one of the big ones was something called ahimsa. And ahimsa means do no harm. There's an equivalent in Buddhist tradition as well. And that was taken to mean eat vegetarian food, do not kill animals in order to get your food. And that also led me to experimenting with a vegan diet, only for a short period of time, I'm glad to say. But I think I was vegan for 6 months, and that was very easy where I lived. It was very easy amongst the people that I was with. But I did feel restricted. It was difficult if I was away from home. and I just kind of had enough of it after 6 months. But one of the things I learned through that was how fundamentally you can change your palate, how you can change your sense of taste and smell according to what you're used to eating. Because, you know, I was a good cook, and I found it quite easy to make vegan food tasty enough. I wouldn't say it was wholly satisfying enough, but then I was in the habit of snacking and so on anyway, so I didn't realize that was a problem. But I did find that when I went back, that the first foods I reintroduced was cheese, and I couldn't believe how animal that cheese tasted. It was cheddar cheese, and it tasted and smelt like a dairy farm. You know, it seemed incredibly strong, and that was a lesson I didn't forget, and I sort of rehabituated to it within a few weeks, and then just carried on and reintroduced meat after a while, and so on. But it was an interesting experiment. So those were my yoga years, and incidentally, I'm still a yoga teacher, so it's not like that went, but it was very influential in what I did, and it taught me also to be much more in tune with my body. So that was a good thing. That was a good thing, and that's held me in good stead ever since, and I think made me much more receptive to noticing the effect, for example, that foods have on my system. So the whole yoga space was, it was not a negative experience at all. However, the yoga thing is probably a good segue into another major influence that brought me to carnivore, to stay on topic, and that is that I had back pain. So I started yoga because a friend said to me, she was training to be a yoga teacher, and she was going to train in a therapeutic school, and she knew that I had back pain. So she said to me, this kind of yoga is not going to be incredibly demanding. It's not going to be ridiculously gymnastic. It's designed to help people therapeutically with whatever issues they have. Body, soul, and spirit, really. Sorry, not body, soul, and spirit. Wipe that one. This school of yoga is not ridiculously gymnastic. It's designed to be therapeutic and to help people with whatever ailments they have, whether that's body, mind, or spirit. And I thought it sounded wonderful, and I went along and took some classes, really enjoyed them, and I hoped that it would be the answer to the back pain that I'd had actually since I'd been about 21 or 22. So this back pain was not constant, but it was regular. It would crop up every 6 or 8 weeks. I'd have some kind of spasm in my back, and it started in my sort of mid-back. One night I was at a friend's house. I walked from one room to the other, went up a step and twisted at the same time. I had a strange feeling in my back. It wasn't painful, but by the end of that night, I couldn't sit up straight. By the next morning, I couldn't stand. I had x-rays. There's nothing wrong with your back. I went to see PTs. There's nothing wrong with your back. There's certainly something wrong with it. But that particular episode eased over a period of weeks, and thereafter it was just recurrent spasms out of the blue, or so it seemed to me, and sometimes they'd affect my neck. So it was not uncommon to maybe get off my bike, look around and find that my neck my head was stuck there, and I was having to live like this, you know, for the next few days. Or I would get up from a chair and my lower back would lock and spasm. And it made life difficult, you know, because you could never predict whether or not you were going to be well. And by the time I was 24, I'd met several fitness teachers socially and got interested in what they were doing. And they took me weight training, saying that I needed to strengthen my back and my muscles, and that would fix it. Well, that didn't fix it. That was just new problems. And then I came across, they introduced me to an osteopath. And that seemed like the answer to my prayers, because he could fix it. So if my neck was you know, kinked around to the side, he would go, and then I would be able to look forward again, which was wonderful. And I keep going to him, and he'd be saying, so what is it that you're doing to yourself that, you know, you keep coming back? And I'd say, I don't know, you tell me. You know, what is it that I'm doing to myself? And that sort of, that comment, it's just a little comment, but it set the seed. Even though he couldn't resolve the issue, it set the seed that I was perhaps doing something to myself that was causing this problem, and that perhaps the answer, you know, lay within myself. So anyway, I continued to teach yoga. I got quite good at helping people to manage back pain, but the back pain didn't go. And then eventually, in 2010, one of my yoga students gave me a copy of a book that said 8 Steps to a Pain-Free Back, because she knew I was still suffering with back pain. And I looked at it, and, you know, I'd suffered with back pain for over 20 years by that point. And I thought, yeah, 8 steps to a pain-free back, if only it was that easy, because, you know, I'd done the yoga, I'd done the weights, I'd seen PTs, I'd done Rolfing, which was a deep fascial work, osteopaths, chiropractors. I felt I'd tried everything. And it had even been suggested to me, which was pretty annoying, that, you know, I was getting something out of having this bad back. You know, it was a sort of psychological bad back. So anyway, I looked at the cover of this book, and to be honest, I just thought, yeah, okay, another American self-help book that promises everything and delivers very little. And a couple of weeks later, I thought, well, I really must give this back. So I gave it back to her. But before I did that, I actually opened it and read it. And it just blew me away, because it answered the question, as far as I was concerned, what am I doing wrong that can be put right, that I can do something about? And the answer essentially was that in our culture, and this absolutely parallels my experience with food, you know, that in our culture we have lost our way, that we have left behind well tried and tested ancestral ways of doing things, and we have got ourselves into a whole load of trouble. And, you know, the book goes into a lot of anthropological detail about how this change came about, the populations that have managed to not change their posture and biomechanics, and who have retained healthy structures and don't have back pain, and the things that distinguish them from us, and how we can learn by observing them. We can learn what they're doing and learn to copy that and cure our pain. So yeah, that was an absolute game changer, and I wanted more of it. As a yoga teacher who'd worked with lots of yogis that I respected, I thought, I want to work with the author of this book. You know, I want to go and meet her. The book, incidentally, is by Clare. So I contacted her, and she said, well, you know, if you want to work with me, come and do the course, which meant getting on a plane and going to San Francisco that summer, which is what I did. And I was blown away by the course. I can remember getting on the plane and thinking, how am I going to do a long haul trip and get myself there and carry my bag and not have back pain? You know, I was really worried about it, how things have changed, because you know, that wouldn't faze me at all now. But I went and I did the Go Clay Foundations course, which was a weekend course. I was jet lagged. I couldn't afford to stay in America for very long, so it was basically a long weekend. I came back and I thought, my goodness, you know, that was a blast, and worked with the material for a few months and decided to become a teacher of the Go Clay method. Now, I went out to do the training that sort of Christmas, New Year period, 2011 then. And that's when I was introduced in more detail to this concept of ancestral health. So Esther Go Clay had been asked to speak, I believe, at the Western A. Price Foundation, and she also spoke at the Ancestral Health Society Symposium, and she did a lot of other talks as well. You know, I think she was in Palo Alto, so I mean, she was talking to Facebook and as it was there then, and Google and various other companies. But of particular interest to me were these ancestral health connections, and that and she said to me that, you know, in turn that had influenced her and her family in how they ate. And it was the early days of paleo. And she said to me, oh, you've heard of the paleo diet? And I said, no. And so I started looking at that. Once I trained as a teacher, I was back in the UK. I continued that interest. I got, I think the first person that I discovered was Mark Sisson, and Mark's Daily Apple, which sounds quite amusing now, doesn't it? So my diet gradually became less whole foody in terms of you know, grains and sourdough bread and things like that, and switched over towards a more keto approach. So yeah, the keto approach, it was a tweak. It wasn't a radical change until 2021, when I developed a heart arrhythmia, and it was alarming because my heartbeat I kept missing a beat, basically. And I noticed it, I think, fairly immediately because of this body awareness. And you know, if I was sitting and doing some yoga breathing or something like that, I'd be very aware of my pulse. You know, when I was quiet, it's not something I noticed in the sort of cut and thrust of daily life, but in quiet moments, I could sense it, and I could also feel it. I could feel a sort of a tickle in my throat. So I consulted Dr. Google, as you do, and I decided I should get it checked out. And then one evening, it was really quite persistent. I was missing, 10, 12 beats a minute. So we went to A&E, and they were very thorough, and they did a ECG for me. In fact, they did several, and they told me that it was nothing to worry about, that, you know, this sometimes happens at your age. And that was a bit of a red flag in itself to me, because I didn't like to be told that, and I certainly didn't like the sensation. Okay, so back to Dr. Google, and I found something that talked about ketones being an article that talked about ketones being brilliant fuel for the organs, particularly the heart and the brain. And it also referred, ketones meant nothing to me, but it also referred to a ketogenic diet. And the word diet did interest me, because I'd always had this feeling that, you know, that food mattered, and that I could do something about my diet. So that was the beginning, really. And I very quickly found Low Carb Down Under, and on Low Carb Down Under, I found so many wonderful speakers, Gary Fettke, Pran Yoganathan, a gastroenterologist in Australia, Paul Mason. And it was probably Paul Mason, actually, that I listened to most. I was so impressed by his command of research and his reinterpretation of research, and unearthing things that have been buried and misrepresented in research on diet. And so I exhausted Paul Mason on Low Carb Down Under pretty quickly. Like many people who get into this space, you know, you have a voracious appetite for this knowledge. And so I migrated to YouTube, and continued to listen to Paul Mason there. And after a while, I noticed that the algorithms were feeding me, it's the usual stuff, were feeding me things about eating meat, and a carnivore diet, which was, you know, well annoying, because I wasn't interested in kind of that weird stuff. I just wanted to hear more from these knowledgeable people that I'd found on Low Carb Down Under. And, you know, I was measuring my ketones and, you know, this kind of stuff, getting very interested in it. Then I listened to another video by Paul Mason, and it became apparent during the video that he was one of these people who only ate meat, which was a bit of a shock, because I'd been avoiding that. I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole. It seemed very extreme and bizarre to me. But because I already had great respect and trust for him, I started to listen. And I kept a bit quiet about it. You know, if me and my partner were sort of scrolling of an evening, which we sometimes do, she'd say, "Oh, what are you watching?" Oh, just another of those low carb videos. I didn't want to say what I was looking at, because it seemed so weird. And then I sort of started to mention it, because I actually wanted to experiment with that, and I wanted to get rid of some of the keto stuff that I've been introducing, like the almond flour everything, you know, what else? Oh, the superfoods. Gosh, that was a whole other phase. The superfood phase: goji berries, chia seeds, lots of grated sweet potato with X, Y, and Z mixed in, you know. So I started to tweak my diet, and my partner really wasn't too sure about this. Cutting down to 100 grams of carbohydrate a day, and I was already getting ketones, I think, at about that rate, and certainly by the time I was 50 grams. But when I saw the carnivore thing, it suddenly made so much more sense, because you weren't dealing with pseudo foods, pseudo grains to make these goods. You weren't measuring everything out. You weren't having to measure your ketones. In fact, as you became fat adapted, the ketones probably drop off a lot anyway. I see the value of measuring them for perhaps therapeutic purposes and so on, but it's not what I wanted as a way of life. I wanted something that was simpler and felt more natural, if you like. So yeah, she kept an eye on me. I did drop a bit of weight. I think it was mainly maybe a bit of visceral fat. I soon settled at around 8.5 stone. What's that? 120 pounds, I think. I've got it written down here. Here we go, 54 kilos, something like that. That's been pretty consistent. I did find I needed to eat more fat than I thought was possible in order to maintain that healthy weight, and also not to get constipated, basically. So that was all going pretty well. My heart arrhythmia actually had stopped on keto after a few weeks, and then it returned. So I looked again, and I cut out caffeine, and I reduced chocolate. And so dark chocolate is something that I really loved, and that little tweak seemed to do it. So the heart arrhythmia has only recurred on very, very seldom, and it's become less and less frequent. So I feel I'm absolutely on the right track with that. With keto and with carnivore, absolutely love the steady blood sugars. As somebody who'd often felt hypoglycemic and crashed and had to reach for the sugar, that was a really nice feeling. No getting hangry and irritable, just constant energy. Very, very nice. So yeah, the carnivore was a transition, and I did 2 years on keto and went carnivore last October, so October 2023. And
wow, so it's been more than a year now.
Yeah, it's been more than a year. Yeah.
And so in the space of 15 months, like there's no back pain now?
There's even less back pain. The postural work that I did, to a large extent, fixed the back pain. I would say to 95%. The difference I notice is that the little maybe niggles that I was left with have gone, and I think that's probably just because any residual inflammation has reduced a lot on carnivore. Yeah.
How has your sleep been? Did you notice? I imagine going from a very plant heavy diet to moving from keto through carnivore, you've probably had improvements with sleep.
To be honest, I've always been a good sleeper. Now, I have had odd periods of insomnia, just for maybe a week or so, which probably have been more linked to stress over the years. But I've been a good sleeper, so I can't credit Carnivore with that. But I think that the main thing for me has been energy, even energy.
Nice. So what's a day of eating like for you these days? Like, how many times do you eat, and what are the meals made up of?
Okay, so I have to be careful not to drop weight. So most days I'll have 3 meals a day. And breakfast will be eggs and something. So it might be eggs and good quality, gluten-free sausage. It might be eggs and smoked salmon. It might be eggs and bacon. Lunch is usually steak, rump steak, or maybe short ribs, slow cooked, or lamb chops, big lamb chops. It's usually like meat. Occasionally mince. If I do use a few herbs and spices to make the meat taste better to me still, but I'm reducing that, because it tastes stronger now. The more meat I eat, the stronger the herbs and spices taste, and I don't need as much. But basically it can go a bit chili, a bit herby. Maybe if it's lamb, it might go a little bit curried still, whatever. But the breakfast and the main meal can usually be sort of without spice, and then supper will be sliced topside, slow cooked, sliced with loads of butter, or it might
You're
be.
making me hungry.
Yeah, my latest discovery, oh my goodness, is pork belly, which I have had out in restaurants before, but I've started to do it at home now. So little bit of, probably Chinese 5-spice, something like that, little bit of that, so that the crackling tastes really nice on the top, but, scored, roasted, and then when it's cold, sliced up and pan fried to order. Yeah, absolutely great.
Nice. So I'm interested in how you're working like meals and this lifestyle with your partner, because she was kind of, I think she's kind of skeptical at the beginning when you wanted to try paleo. So
Yeah.
how are things now? Is she doing this with you, or is it just like kind of, well, you do your own thing, that's up to you?
Yeah, I mean, she's felt that she needs a little bit of carb, but there's been, if you sort of think of it as a time lag, she's kind of followed me 6 months behind, because you find that as you let go of the sugars and the carbs, you just you want them less and less. So she actually will eat the same as me most days for breakfast and lunch, and very similar supper. She tends to like smoked mackerel, is a particular favorite of hers, but occasionally she'll have sliced beef or a bit of pork belly in the evening. But she'll probably top it off with a little bit, like a few crackers. She used to make her own, because she needs to be wheat and oat free. She used to make her own bread, but I noticed that's not happening so much these days either. And in fact, she's finding that her energy is better, her skin is better, and she and I both have had some probably little niggly things, autoimmune type things that we've had for a long time. For me, tiny little pinprick ulcers in my mouth that would, come and go, and then a sort of, I think they call it burning mouth. So the lining of the mouth will sometimes feel really quite itchy and irritable. And again, I've asked my dentist about it. I've asked my doctor. It's something that happens to women of a certain age, and that's not answer enough. But I've noticed on Carnivore, it's going. I haven't had the burning mouth now for about a month. So it's taken a while.
I'm always like, more and more these days, I'm skeptical of doctors or dentists that give an answer like, just happens to men your age, just happens to women your age. It's kind of like, I think you're talking through your bottom when you say things like that now. It's
yeah, absolutely. And talking of bottoms, yeah, I really can't give an honest account of my carnivore journey without mentioning certain things. So I transitioned into carnivore very, very slowly, right through keto, 2 years keto, as I said. So it was not a shock to my system to be eating a lot of protein and fat, and to ditch the carbs. And I was feeling pretty pleased about that. I was feeling pretty smug because I was not having diarrhea. I was not having keto flu, or any of the symptoms that people report and warn you about. For whatever reason that is, the sudden influx of increase of fat, or the adjustment of the microbiome. There are various ideas, and probably people's experiences differ. But I was feeling pretty good about that. And as I said, last October, I started eating all meat, and that went well for months and months and months. And then about 7 months in, I'm saying this because I don't want people to be put off if they have the same experience. About 7 months in, I stood up from my chair one day, and I know the expression is never trust a fart, right? And I was saved that day by some pretty robust underwear and being in my own home, and not out on the high street or somewhere else. So yeah, so that was a one-off. Thank goodness, I thought, because it was pretty dramatic and totally without warning, no abdominal pain or anything. It was a one-off until the next time, which came about 2 months later. Same thing happened a few times, and you think, well, I can't be doing this, because sooner or later my luck's going to run out, and it's not right. So I needed to do some more research, and that's when I found the work of Sally K. Norton and the whole concept of oxalate dumping. And I'd had such a plant-heavy, whole foody diet for years. All the oxalate foods, the almonds, the spinach, the berries, the seeds, the sweet potato, the whole 9 yards. And I'd also started to develop a few styes in my eyes, which I don't remember ever having in my life, which is another common symptom. So you put one thing and another together, and you think, this is it. This is oxalate dumping, which was, it was kind of rough justice, because I'd come across her work, and again, I realised I'd been a bit dismissive about it, like, oh, well, that might happen to some people, or that sounds a bit far-fetched, and then when it happens to you, you realise that the things people are talking about in this space are real, and you experience all these things for yourself. And I'm sure not everybody gets oxalate dumping that they recognise as such, but I certainly did. So I did what she suggests, and I added in, or because I've gone pretty clean by that time, so I added some black tea and decaffeinated coffee back in, and guess what? Those symptoms disappeared.
I appreciate you bringing it up, because it is something that would, if people haven't heard about that kind of thing before, and that suddenly happens, and it's like, okay, no more of this. I'm going back to a normal diet.
Yeah.
And that's really not the way that people should be going. But yeah, so it's important to know that you can manage that. Yeah. So are you still keeping that in? Like, you still have a black tea now and then?
Yeah, I have it very weak, but daily in the morning. I've also cut out dairy in the last few months, and that may be the thing that's helping the mouth issue. I don't know, but yeah, I'm still doing that, and I at some point I will leave off and just see what happens.
If a friend asked you about how to get started with carnivore, with the knowledge that you have, what would you recommend? What advice would you give them?
I think it would be similar to the advice I give when I'm working with people with back pain and looking at their postural issues, and that is to start where you're at. Because people's history is very different, people's resilience psychologically is very different. So I would encourage people to do keto first, basically to gradually up their animal products and up their fats, and bring down the sugars for sure, and carbohydrates, but to do that with oxalates in mind, if they've had a heavy sort of vegetable and seed-based diet, to do that gradually as well. So that would be my general advice. But I know some people, I'm a bit of a moderator, so that suits me. I know many people like to just, make a decision. Things have to be so bad sometimes that you just have to say, that's it, I'm done, and now I'm changing. So I respect the fact that people want to do it different ways.
Yeah, but yeah, that's good advice. I think I probably, maybe similar to your situation, I probably had it easier going into carnivore, because even though it was a very short stint on keto at the time, I'd done keto so many times in the past that I think my body was kind of prepped for it, so I didn't experience as bad as symptoms going in as I maybe would have otherwise.
Yeah. And I think we have to be prepared for it. It's great if it can be a continual, improvement and trajectory, but sometimes that's not the way things can be. There might be a little drop back, or you fall off the wagon, and that's part of learning process. And part of coming through that is the community that we have, mainly online, and the all the everyday people and the doctors who are embracing this way of eating and researching it. The citizen science, the whole sort of ecosphere, if you like, of this is just so helpful for people to navigate their way through it. It's really, really important.
So, Claire, how can people reach out to you? Do you have any social media or any way of getting in contact?
Yeah, the best way to find me or contact me is probably on my email, my work email, because that's the one I check out frequently, and that's Clare, Clare, at goclaymethod.com.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I'll link to your email in the show notes. Thank you very much for coming on today, Claire, and sharing your experience. I really appreciate your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.